The morning of December 24th, 1943, at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, carried a distinct chill in the air. Frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the testing range, glinting in the pale winter sunlight. Artillery officers huddled behind sandbags, binoculars pressed to their eyes, observing a weapon that seemed to defy every principle of engineering they had ever learned. At the center of the clearing stood Edward Kroger and William Muser, two Army engineers whose reputations for innovation teetered precariously between brilliance and recklessness. Before them lay the T-15, a 57mm cannon that looked ordinary in silhouette, yet concealed a radical, almost suicidal design, a mechanism to vent its explosive gases backwards, directly behind the crew, eliminating the recoil that had haunted every artilleryman since the dawn of mechanized warfare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Kroger adjusted his grip on the trigger mechanism, glancing at the field notebook that detailed every calculation he had made over the past months. Muser bent low, inspecting the perforated metal cylinder that encased the breech. Both men were acutely aware of the skepticism that clung to them like a second uniform. "You're going to kill yourselves," muttered one artillery observer, his tone measured, almost grudgingly respectful of the courage, or folly, he witnessed. The men ignored him. In the next few seconds, history might record a triumph or a tragedy. They pulled the trigger. The explosion erupted with a controlled fury. Gas hissed evenly through 400 tiny holes, the metallic roar contained, precise, almost surgical. The projectile shot downrange, 450 yards away, and obliterated its target with uncanny accuracy. No crew members were thrown to the ground. No weapon recoiled violently. The artillery officers stared in disbelief. Colonel James Harrison, Aberdeen's chief artillery evaluator, lowered his binoculars slowly, eyes widening as the realization sank in. The T-15 had done what conventional wisdom deemed impossible. In a single test, 2 engineers had delivered artillery-level power in a form portable enough for paratroopers. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The context behind this audacious experiment lay in the harsh lessons of the war in Europe and the Pacific. By 1943, American paratroopers had encountered a brutal reality. Mobility often came at the expense of firepower. Infantry units parachuted behind enemy lines were vulnerable to fortified positions that standard small arms could not neutralize. The bazooka, though celebrated for its revolutionary design, had an effective range limited to roughly 150 yards. German machine gun nests, however, could engage targets safely from 300 to 400 yards, creating lethal zones where American soldiers were effectively pinned. Mortars provided indirect fire, but required forward observers and took precious time to coordinate, a delay that often proved fatal in the fast-moving, fragmented engagements of airborne operations. The Army had invested heavily in a conventional solution, a massive 200-pound, 105mm recoilless rifle, the T-19, modeled on captured German Geschütz 40 designs. The weapon was reliable and powerful, but nearly impossible for airborne troops to deploy effectively. A 4-man crew was required to lift, assemble, and operate it. Its use revealed the tension between brute force and tactical mobility, a problem the paratroopers faced constantly in Sicily and later in Italy. Entire companies could be immobilized for hours by single enemy machine gun nests positioned beyond the reach of their portable weapons. Kroger and Muser approached this problem differently. Their solution drew inspiration from a British experimental concept, attempting to redirect propellant gases through a network of precisely engineered holes in the cartridge casing. Each shell contained 400 holes lined with heat-resistant plastic, designed to release the back pressure at the exact moment of firing. This innovation eliminated recoil without sacrificing velocity, delivering projectiles at 1,200 feet per second, 4 times the speed of a standard bazooka rocket. The ingenuity was dangerous. A miscalculation could result in catastrophic backblast, seriously injuring or killing the crew. Yet the potential payoff was enormous. For the first time, American paratroopers could carry true artillery firepower directly to the battlefield. The engineers' meticulous preparation underscored their understanding of the stakes. Kroger checked the firing bands of the shell, copper rings machined to exact specifications to spin the projectile for stability. Muser monitored the venting system, ensuring each tiny perforation was unobstructed. Every element had to work perfectly. Failure would not merely be professional embarrassment, it could be fatal. As the first shell soared, hitting its target with pinpoint accuracy, the observers realized that a quiet revolution in infantry support had just begun. The skepticism surrounding Kroger and Muser's work was not unwarranted. Conventional artillery doctrine, taught at West Point and reinforced through decades of field manuals, emphasized controlled, predictable explosions, predictable recoil, and the safety of crews. The idea of venting propellant gases backward, directly behind a firing team, challenged every principle of the art of war. Many officers considered it reckless, even heretical. Yet Kroger and Muser's success demonstrated that ingenuity, grounded in careful calculation and engineering rigor, could overturn assumptions once considered immutable. By late November, the T-15 had survived repeated trials at Aberdeen, earning official scrutiny alongside the T-19. The two weapons, David and Goliath in this narrative, would undergo a side-by-side test that determined the future of airborne artillery. The T-19, massive and imposing, represented conventional wisdom, an application of proven German engineering scaled up for American use. The T-15, in contrast, represented the audacity of innovation, the quiet confidence of two engineers willing to confront institutional inertia and skepticism. The day of the side-by-side evaluation arrived with a tense stillness that mirrored the stakes. Aberdeen Proving Ground's main firing range was alive with a muted hum of anticipation. Officers, engineers, and enlisted men had gathered along the ridges and observation bunkers, all acutely aware that the future of American airborne artillery hung in the balance. The T-19, massive and imposing, had already been positioned near the center of the range, its crew bustling with confident precision. 4 men moved with practiced coordination, hoisting the 200-pound gun onto its carriage, leveling it meticulously, checking sights, and preparing the first shell for firing. The cannon exuded authority, its sheer size a tangible reminder of the American military's preference for proven conventional solutions. Behind it, the T-15 stood in stark contrast. Kroger and Muser, their small 2-man team dwarfed by the massive artillery piece across the clearing, carefully wheeled their 57mm recoilless rifle into position. Every movement was deliberate. The ground beneath the weapon crunched underfoot, a reminder of the winter's grip on the range. Observers whispered among themselves. How could this small, seemingly delicate weapon possibly compete with a 200-pound behemoth that embodied decades of engineering wisdom? Colonel Harrison, who had overseen both projects since their inception, gave the formal instructions. First, the T-19, then the T-15. Accuracy, range, and rate of fire will be evaluated. All personnel remain behind safety barriers. His tone was measured, but his mind churned with the awareness that this test would be scrutinized at the highest levels of Army procurement. The T-19 crew initiated the first firing sequence. The gun recoiled with familiar authority, each discharge accompanied by a sharp kick that sent shivers through the observation posts. The shell flew with precision, its explosive charge obliterating the distant concrete target. It was textbook perfection, exactly what the Army expected. Yet even as the results were recorded, murmurs rippled through the crowd. The gun required 4 men to operate, and the recoil produced a momentary instability that demanded careful realignment after each shot. Not a flaw, but a reminder of the weapon's weight and the logistical limitations it imposed on mobile infantry units. Then came the T-15. Kroger and Muser moved with calm efficiency. A shell was loaded into the breech, driving bands carefully aligned, venting holes inspected one last time. Kroger's hand rested on the trigger. Muser signaled readiness. A tense silence fell across the range, punctuated only by the soft gust of winter wind. "Fire," Kroger called, voice steady. The T-15 discharged with a muted roar. A column of smoke curled backward through the perforated venting system. But the weapon itself did not move. The projectile flew straight and true, striking the target with surgical precision. No recoil, no crew injuries. The observer's jaws dropped. Colonel Harrison, for the first time in his long career, allowed himself a moment of disbelief. The little weapon had matched, and in terms of portability exceeded, the performance of the T-19. Over the next hour the test repeated. 50 shells were fired from each weapon, alternating crews to ensure fairness. Each time the T-19 performed reliably but demanded its full crew and careful realignment. Each time the T-15 fired as if by magic, every shot accurate, no crew injuries, no weapon displacement, and the crew could have easily carried and redeployed it within minutes. By the final evaluation, the implications were undeniable. American paratroopers could finally carry artillery-level firepower directly into combat, a revolutionary change in battlefield dynamics. The reactions among the observers varied. Younger officers, fresh from deployments in Sicily and Italy, whispered about the tactical advantages this weapon could provide. Entire companies that had previously been pinned down by distant machine gun nests could now strike back immediately, with precision, without waiting for mortars or conventional artillery support. Veteran artillerymen were slower to warm to the innovation, their skepticism rooted in decades of doctrine and the dangers of unconventional designs. Even so, as the T-15 crew disassembled and prepared the weapon for transport, a tangible sense of awe permeated the range. Kroger and Muser, despite the success, were acutely aware that proving the concept was only the beginning. Bureaucracy, tradition, and inertia would not surrender easily. The Army had millions of dollars invested in the T-19 program, and admitting that a 2-man freelance project had produced a superior solution required a level of humility rarely displayed in wartime procurement. Over the next months, the engineers documented every aspect of their weapon: firing logs, material analyses, range testing data, and durability assessments. Each page of their reports underscored a simple yet radical principle: mobility, precision, and firepower need not be mutually exclusive. The broader implications extended far beyond Aberdeen. American airborne forces were preparing for critical operations in Western Europe. The upcoming invasion of Normandy, the liberation of occupied France, and subsequent missions deep behind enemy lines demanded flexibility. Paratroopers could no longer rely solely on timing and luck to neutralize fortified positions. The T-15 offered an unprecedented combination of portability and destructive power, transforming tactical planning. Commanders could now envision assaults where a single two-man crew could provide immediate support to a full infantry company, enabling faster advances, reducing casualties, and enhancing operational tempo. Field tests conducted in the months following the Aberdeen trials confirmed the T-15's efficacy. Soldiers in training exercises marveled at its simplicity and reliability. Unlike conventional artillery, the weapon required minimal setup. A pair of infantrymen could carry it across rough terrain, position it in a clearing or behind cover, and provide accurate fire within minutes. Paratrooper units practiced rapid deployment, simulating scenarios where German positions were encountered immediately upon landing. The results were remarkable. Previously insurmountable obstacles were neutralized, and the soldiers' confidence in their firepower increased measurably. Psychological benefits, though intangible, were as significant as the physical destruction the weapon provided. By the summer of 1944, the T-15 had begun limited production. Engineers and ordnance officers collaborated to refine materials, improve barrel longevity, and optimize manufacturing processes. Reports from the field began to arrive. The weapon was transforming engagements in Italy and later in preparations for Operation Overlord. Paratroopers trained with an entirely new mindset. The T-15 became a symbol of ingenuity, a tangible demonstration that sometimes the most dangerous ideas executed with precision and care could outperform the safest, most established solutions. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The story of Kroger and Muser also illustrated a broader truth about innovation in wartime. The military, like any large institution, often favors incremental improvements to known technology. Radical ideas are dismissed, delayed or buried in layers of bureaucracy. Yet necessity, born from the harsh realities of combat, can compel individuals to challenge orthodoxy. The two engineers had recognized a gap in capability, and rather than accept the limitations imposed by conventional artillery, they devised a solution that honored the principle of rigorous engineering while embracing calculated risk. Their work exemplified the balance between audacity and meticulous preparation. Operational deployment revealed the T-15's transformative potential. Paratrooper units in Normandy, dropping behind German lines in June of 1944, carried the weapon with relative ease. Within hours of landing, the T-15 provided suppressive fire that neutralized machine gun nests, fortified positions, and sniper emplacements. Reports highlighted not only the tactical success but the morale boost it offered to troops who had previously been vulnerable to entrenched enemy fire. The weapon allowed smaller units to punch above their weight, turning a two-man team into a force multiplier. The introduction of the T-15 also influenced post-war ordnance development. Lessons learned regarding recoil mitigation, venting technologies, and portable artillery informed Cold War-era weapons design. Engineers examined the principles Kroger and Muser had demonstrated, adapting them to larger calibers and more complex delivery systems. Even decades later, modern infantry weapons bear traces of the ingenuity first proven at Aberdeen on that December morning in 1943. Amid the technical triumphs, the human element remained central to the story. Soldiers who relied on the T-15 consistently remarked on its reliability and predictability, traits rarely associated with weapons of such revolutionary design. In diaries and after-action reports, paratroopers described the confidence that came from knowing a weapon in their hands could match the destructive power of artillery without the logistical encumbrances. This psychological impact, subtle but profound, highlighted a core truth of combat. The material reliability of equipment can shape morale, operational decision-making, and ultimately, survival. Despite the T-15's undeniable success, institutional resistance persisted. Army procurement officials grappled with the implications of reallocating funding from the T-19 program. Production lines, contracts, and traditional hierarchies all had to be negotiated. Kroger and Muser became advocates as well as engineers, navigating bureaucratic channels to ensure that their invention would reach the units it was designed to empower. Their persistence underscored another lesson. Innovation is not solely a matter of technical skill, but also of patience, diplomacy, and strategic presentation. By the fall of 1944, the T-15 was fully integrated into select airborne units. Its use in training exercises, simulated assaults, and eventual combat deployments confirmed that Kroger and Muser had solved a problem that conventional thinking had left unresolved. They had delivered a weapon that was safe, portable, accurate, and powerful. Qualities that allowed paratroopers to operate with unprecedented autonomy behind enemy lines. The weapon was small in stature but immense in impact, a testament to the principle that transformative innovation often arrives in unexpected forms. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. As the war continued, the T-15's legacy extended beyond individual battles. It represented a shift in military engineering philosophy, where small, agile teams could achieve results previously thought impossible. In contrast to the massive, cumbersome solutions favored by bureaucracies, the weapon exemplified a principle of efficiency without compromise, applying knowledge, risk management, and meticulous calculation to create tools that amplified human capability. The story of two engineers challenging orthodoxies resonated with future generations of military innovators, proving that thoughtful audacity could reshape the battlefield. The winter of 1944 gave way to early spring, and with it, the T-15 had become more than just an experimental weapon. It had evolved into a symbol of American ingenuity under pressure. Soldiers across airborne units began to speak of it in practical, almost reverent terms. Unlike larger artillery, whose presence was obvious and whose deployment required careful coordination, the T-15 could be slipped into the hands of a small, highly trained team, carried across frozen fields, through forests, or dropped from the belly of a C-47 into the chaos of occupied territory. Its portability transformed operational planning. Commanders could now execute rapid assaults with precision firepower that previously would have required hours of setup and coordination. Field manuals were revised to incorporate the new weapon, albeit cautiously. Instructions emphasized backblast safety, proper positioning, and maintenance. But even as the Army codified these procedures, the T-15's very existence challenged the assumptions that had dominated artillery doctrine for decades. In a sense, it forced military planners to reconsider not just what artillery could do, but who could wield it. A two-man team now had the potential to equal the firepower of a conventional four-man battery. And this shift in operational philosophy did not go unnoticed by forward-deployed commanders. In Normandy, during the airborne landings of June 1944, reports from paratrooper units documented the T-15 in action for the first time in a high-stakes combat environment. Dropped behind enemy lines, units quickly located German fortifications, machine gun nests, reinforced bunkers, and sniper positions that had previously proven nearly impossible to neutralize with standard infantry weapons. Within minutes, T-15 crews deployed, firing with pinpoint accuracy. Concrete bunkers were reduced to rubble, machine guns silenced, and German defenders caught entirely by surprise at the unexpected mobility and precision of American firepower. Observers noted that the psychological effect on both sides was substantial. American troops gained a sense of empowerment, while German units, accustomed to holding positions seemingly beyond the reach of portable weapons, suddenly faced an invisible, highly mobile threat. The anecdotal accounts from Normandy spread quickly throughout the army. Letters from soldiers, diary entries, and after-action reports all highlighted the T-15's reliability and its transformative impact on small unit tactics. One diary from a young lieutenant of the 82nd Airborne described, "For the first time it felt like we had the tools to take on the enemy without being pinned down by unseen machine guns. We could move, fire, and move again, all with confidence that the weapon behind us would perform every time." The diary entry, mundane in tone yet rich in context, encapsulated the essence of what Kroger and Muser had achieved: empowerment through technological ingenuity. Despite its successes, the T-15 faced challenges beyond the battlefield. Military procurement and production systems, notoriously slow to adapt, required extensive documentation, repeated field trials, and ongoing advocacy from both engineers and supportive officers. Funding allocations initially favored the T-19, whose massive artillery output was familiar and trusted. It required a series of internal memoranda, technical briefings, and endorsements from forward commanders before the T-15 could gain wider acceptance. Kroger and Muser became not just engineers, but persistent advocates for the tactical principles their invention enabled, navigating a bureaucracy resistant to change yet ultimately forced to confront irrefutable results. By late 1944, production of the T-15 had ramped up, and the weapon was issued to airborne units across Europe. Its operational record was impressive. Units could carry it across varied terrain, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the mountainous regions of Italy, engaging targets previously considered out of reach. The effectiveness of the T-15 also highlighted a key lesson about innovation in wartime. The smallest teams, armed with insight and careful engineering, could produce effects disproportionate to their size. In this sense, Kroger and Muser had not only delivered a superior weapon, but had subtly reshaped the culture of innovation within the Army. Field reports further demonstrated that the T-15 allowed for more aggressive operational planning. Assaults that had been delayed or avoided due to the limitations of portable firepower could now be executed with confidence. Paratrooper teams frequently combined T-15 fire with bazooka and mortar support, creating layered attacks that maximized the lethality of small units while minimizing casualties. These engagements produced metrics that were striking: targets destroyed at distances 3 times greater than previous portable weapons, reduction in casualties during initial assaults, and a measurable increase in the speed and effectiveness of offensive operations. The human story remained central to this transformation. Soldiers trusted the weapon because it was reliable, intuitive, and directly addressed their most pressing tactical concerns. Morale improved not merely because of the destructive capability, but because soldiers felt safer and more capable in unpredictable combat environments. A sense of empowerment permeated training exercises, and this confidence carried over into combat scenarios, often tipping the balance in small unit engagements. The T-15 had, in effect, elevated the human dimension of warfare. Technology amplified skill, judgment, and courage rather than supplanting them. As 1945 approached, the T-15's legacy extended beyond the immediate tactical benefits. Engineers and military analysts studied its design principles, particularly the recoilless mechanism, venting system, and precision engineering of the projectiles. These innovations informed post-war developments in portable artillery, anti-tank weapons, and infantry support systems. The concept of balancing power, portability, and safety became a guiding principle for Cold War-era weapons development. Military historians would later note that the T-15 represented a turning point, an example of how relatively simple engineering solutions, conceived under constraint and tested rigorously, could produce outsized effects on the battlefield. In the immediate post-war period, Kroger and Muser returned to civilian life, but their contributions continued to influence military thinking. Both men were recognized within engineering circles and military publications for their ingenuity, though their names remained less familiar to the public than the pilots, generals, and famous battles that often dominate popular narratives. Yet for those who served with the T-15, the engineer's work was remembered vividly. Letters from veterans decades later recalled the reliability of the weapon, the confidence it inspired, and the sense of agency it provided when confronting enemy fortifications. In effect, the T-15 had become a quiet legend among airborne units, a testament to the profound impact that careful, daring innovation can achieve in the midst of global conflict. The broader lesson of the T-15's development and deployment is one of institutional humility and the recognition that necessity can catalyze breakthroughs that conventional thinking would dismiss. Two engineers, working in relative obscurity and constrained by skepticism, had produced a solution that addressed a critical gap in combat effectiveness. Their story underscores the intersection of human ingenuity, technical mastery, and the relentless pressures of war, conditions in which audacious ideas, executed with precision and rigor, can redefine possibilities. By the end of the war, the T-15 had firmly earned its place in the pantheon of small but significant innovations that changed the trajectory of military operations. Airborne units had gained capabilities previously unattainable. Paratroopers were less constrained by logistical limitations, and lessons from its design continued to influence military engineering. The work of two engineers, once doubted, became a quiet legend, a reminder that behind every major campaign, beyond the headlines of battles and generals, are individuals whose ingenuity, determination, and daring can profoundly alter the battlefield. As we reflect on this story, it becomes clear that the intersection of human creativity and technical mastery often defines the outcomes of conflict more than sheer numbers or brute force. The T-15 recoilless rifle, small and unassuming in appearance, symbolizes a paradigm shift, the potential of unconventional thinking, rigorous engineering, and courage under scrutiny to create solutions that save lives and reshape tactics. In the grand narrative of World War II, the T-15 is not merely a weapon. It is a testament to the enduring impact of human ingenuity in the face of adversity. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The war ended, but the story of the T-15 did not. If anything, peace cast a different light on everything that had happened, on the risks taken, the skepticism overcome, and the strange way that obscure engineering decisions ended up shaping the fates of men scattered across continents. Once the guns cooled and the armies redeployed, the world began to look back at the war with a mixture of awe, exhaustion, and disbelief. And in that long, slow reckoning, the T-15's story, like so many frontline innovations, flickered in and out of view, remembered intensely by those whose lives it touched and forgotten, by bureaucracies eager to return to familiar patterns. In the months after VE Day, the Army sent thousands of men home, and the vast logistical machine that had driven the war wound down. Aberdeen Proving Ground, once alive with urgent experimentation, fell into a quieter rhythm. The bays where Kroger and Muser had once hovered nervously over prototypes now hummed with routine peacetime diagnostics. Testing ranges that had echoed with explosions grew still, except for the occasional training demonstration. Many of the engineers who had lived through the wartime tempo felt a strange emptiness, an abrupt silence, where once every day had been a race against looming catastrophe. Kroger returned to a desk inside the Ordnance Research Building. where stacks of post-war planning documents replaced the feverish test memos of 43 and 44. Gone were the tense meetings where colonels questioned his sanity for venting explosive gases backward. Gone were the anxious nights when he lay awake wondering whether his calculations would kill one of the test crew. Peace, for him, was quieter but less vivid. He took walks in the evenings along the water, and sometimes stared out at the faint glow of factories across the river, remembering days when everything he touched felt as though it could either help win a war or destroy the man holding it. Muser adjusted more easily to peacetime, though he too felt the odd hollowness of going from life or death engineering to the slower, methodical pace of federal research. He started giving talks to engineering students, first as a favor, then as a recurring invitation. He told them stories not about glory or heroism, but about the weight that came with innovation in wartime. He explained how, in December of 43, he and Kroger had stood on a frozen field watching that first T-15 round streak downrange, each silently calculating what would happen if one of their assumptions proved wrong by even a fraction. Every innovation, he would say, carries a shadow behind it. You cannot enjoy the light unless you acknowledge the shadow. But even as the engineers adjusted to post-war life, memories of the T-15 burned brightly in the minds of the soldiers who had carried it into battle. In 1947, at a reunion in Fort Bragg, dozens of paratroopers from the 82nd gathered to reconnect with men who had shared the worst and best moments of their lives. The stories they told were punctuated not only by laughter and sorrow, but by the weapon that had so often tipped the scales during the grimmest hours. One veteran, Sergeant Daniel Red Harkins, had survived a brutal firefight near Sainte-Mère-Église. When he stood to speak, the room quieted, not because he was famous, but because everyone knew what he'd lived through. He described the German farmhouse that had been turned into a fortress, the way the MG-42 stitched the hedgerows so relentlessly that no one dared move. Then he described the sudden arrival of the T-15 team, crawling through cold mud under tracer fire. He remembered how, after the round struck the farmhouse, the machine guns stopped as if someone had slammed the book shut on death itself. He tapped the table with 2 fingers. "You don't forget something that saves your life," he said. As peace settled across Europe, military historians began their long work of gathering data, interviewing survivors, piecing together battlefield diagrams, and reconstructing the engagements of Normandy. Again and again they encountered mentions of small 2-man teams carrying a recoilless rifle that hit targets previously considered unreachable for infantry weapons. Reports from company commanders praised its reliability. Diaries from enlisted men described the relief it brought in tense firefights. Analysts studying casualty patterns noticed that units equipped with the T-15 often completed assaults more quickly and with fewer losses. Yet as these conclusions mounted, the Army's official records still dedicated only a few lines to the weapon. It never received the cinematic fame of the flamethrower, the bazooka, or the massive artillery pieces that thundered through newsreels. It was a quiet tool, precise, portable, and deeply practical. In the public's imagination, the war was won by tanks, bombers, and generals. Few knew the name of the 2 engineers whose work had saved hundreds of soldiers from dying in the hedgerows and forests of Europe. Kroger never complained about this. He once wrote in a private letter that no weapon worth building is meant to be celebrated, only meant to work. Yet he and Muser both understood something few civilians ever would, the human cost of innovation. During the war, several early prototypes nearly killed their test crews. Once, a vent plate warped under pressure, sending a hot jet of gas sideways instead of backward. Another time, a winter test nearly caused the breech to fracture. Each time, the engineers stood only yards away, holding their breath, aware that their math was the only barrier between progress and catastrophe. After the war, Kroger began receiving letters from veterans, first occasionally, then more regularly. Some were short notes thanking him for that wonderful little cannon. Others were detailed accounts of firefights in which the T-15 made the decisive difference. A few came from the children of men who had passed away, explaining that their fathers had spoken fondly of the weapon that kept us alive when nothing else could reach the enemy. Kroger kept every letter. Muser kept his too, but he was more public about them. He collected them in a binder and brought them out during his lectures, showing future engineers that behind every blueprint, every weld, every calculation, was a human being whose life might depend on that work. By the early 1950s, the world had shifted into the uneasy standoff of the Cold War. Great powers raced to build bigger bombs, faster aircraft, and more advanced artillery. And quietly, behind the headline-grabbing innovations, recoilless weapons evolved into a family of standard tools used across the globe. American military planners studying the Korean peninsula recognized the same tactical patterns they had seen in Europe: enemy fortifications, mountainous terrain, and the need for lightweight, portable firepower. The principles first tested in the T-15, careful venting, minimal recoil, precise stabilization, now formed the backbone of new designs. Military publications noted that the Soviets, too, had adopted similar concepts. The shadow of Aberdeen's experiments stretched around the world, influencing weapons on both sides of the Iron Curtain. It was an odd legacy. The invention that had once been dismissed as reckless had become fundamental to modern infantry doctrine. Even so, Kroger struggled with the way innovation shifted from urgent necessity to arms race competition. He worried that military institutions favored scale over humanity, spectacle over practicality. To him, the T-15 had never been about dominance or intimidation. It had been about leveling the playing field for paratroopers and infantrymen thrust into impossible positions. It had been about creating a small, reliable tool that saved lives by giving ordinary soldiers a chance against fortified positions. He once told Muser during a quiet evening walk, "Our best work happened when we weren't trying to change the world. We were just trying to help the men on the ground. Maybe that's what innovation is supposed to be." Years passed. The war receded into memory. Veterans aged. New conflicts arose. New weapons were developed. But the principles that had guided the T-15 endured. Innovation should serve the soldier. Portability matters. Precision matters. And sometimes, the most unlikely ideas, those dismissed as too dangerous or too strange, end up pushing the battlefield forward. In 1963, 2 decades after that first cold December test, Kroger and Muser were invited back to Aberdeen Proving Ground for a ceremony honoring wartime innovators. They stood on the same firing range where their early prototypes had roared to life. The grass was thinner, the structures older, and the air warmer than it had been that winter long ago. A young officer guiding them paused at the firing line and asked quietly, "Did you know back then what it would become?" Kroger brushed his hand along the weathered railing of the bunker. "No," he said. "We only knew what it could be, if we didn't make a single mistake." Muser stepped beside him, looking out over the long stretch of land where so many of their fears, calculations, hopes, and doubts had collided. He nodded slowly. "And we knew the men who carried it deserved our very best." They stood there together for a long time, 2 old friends, 2 unlikely heroes, bound forever not by medals or fame, but by a shared belief in what could be achieved through knowledge, courage, and stubborn determination. The young officer watched them silently, realizing only then that behind every battle, behind every victory, behind every story in the vast saga of the war, there were people like these two, engineers who never fired a shot in anger, yet whose work had quietly shaped the world. When Kroger and Muser finally turned away from the field, the sun was setting behind the test range, casting long shadows across the ground. It was impossible not to think of those December mornings long ago, when shadows from scaffolds and test stands stretched across the snow, and two engineers stood with nervous hope, watching their impossible idea come to life. The T-15 recoilless rifle never earned a place in the popular memory of World War II. It lacked the grandeur of massive artillery, the spectacle of bombers, the dramatic imagery of tank battles. But its legacy lived on in the lives it saved, the battles it transformed, and the quiet revolution it sparked in military thinking. And perhaps that was fitting. For in the end, the story of the T-15 is the story of innovation born not from glory, but from necessity. The story of two engineers who dared to challenge the assumptions of their time. The story of the soldiers who carried their creation into the heart of war. And the story of how a small, unassuming weapon, conceived in obscurity and doubted by experts, helped shape the outcome of battles and the evolution of warfare itself. A reminder, as one veteran wrote in his final letter to Kroger many years after the war, not every hero carries a rifle. Some
build the tools that keep other men alive. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.